What would you do if your mother was humiliated in front of billionaires, and the whole world watched you stay silent or stand up? When Derek Samuels walked away from a $900 million deal to defend his mother's dignity, people called him reckless. But what followed wasn't just a media storm. It was a quiet revolution built on values no boardroom could contain. From anonymous letters to long-lost family, from betrayal to forgiveness, Derek's journey became a blueprint for something deeper than success. This isn't just a story about business. It's about legacy, courage, and the high price of choosing what's right. Gloria Samuels arrived at the Greenwich Country Club with the quiet confidence of a woman who had seen life's highs and lows and walked through both with her head held high. The black Lincoln Navigator came to a soft stop by the entrance. Before the driver could even open the door, Gloria stepped out, clutching her worn but elegant leather purse. She didn't wear designer labels, but the pressed seams of her cream blouse and the grace in her posture said more than any brand could. Her wide-brimmed white hat, trimmed with a delicate ribbon that matched her low-heeled shoes, was the kind her late husband used to compliment every Sunday before church. Today she wore it for her son Derek Samuels, a man who had built an empire from scratch. Once a warehouse manager in Trenton, New Jersey, Derek now stood at the helm of a national logistics powerhouse. He had invited his mother to lunch that day, telling her only, "Just be there, Mom. No big speeches, just a quiet celebration." What Gloria didn't know was that the occasion marked the finalization of a $900 million merger with one of America's oldest and most exclusive business dynasties, the Hathaway Group. But the celebration was not what greeted her. She had barely reached the bottom of the marble steps when a woman in a navy uniform stepped in her path. Without a smile, without warmth, the woman gestured toward the back of the building. "Deliveries and staff use the rear entrance, ma'am," she said flatly. Gloria paused, confused. "I'm not staff. I'm here for lunch, with my son Derek Samuels." The woman didn't blink. "If you're accompanying staff or catering crew, the policy is very clear. The back entrance, please." Gloria's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "My name is Gloria Samuels. My son is an owner, and we're meeting here today." From across the veranda, Derek spotted her. He had just raised a glass of champagne to toast the future when his eyes locked onto the scene at the steps. His heart dropped. Then, as if rehearsed in cruelty, a voice sliced through the air like glass dragged across concrete. "Well, I suppose they let anyone in these days," said Victoria Hathaway, matriarch of the Hathaway family. Her pearl necklace gleamed above a crisp blouse. "Do we dine with janitors now?" A ripple of laughter, awkward, unsure, broke out among the younger Hathaway men trying to follow her lead. One of them chuckled, clearly nervous. "She must be joking," he said too quickly. Derek froze. The champagne in his hand suddenly felt heavy. His smile vanished. He set the glass down, slow and deliberate. Meanwhile, Gloria stood tall, her posture calm, her hands clenched quietly around the edges of her purse. It wasn't the first time she had been mistaken for the help, but it didn't sting any less. Victoria turned away, already forgetting the insult she'd just tossed like confetti. For her, it was just another ordinary afternoon. But for Derek, it was anything but ordinary. He walked swiftly across the veranda, his colleagues watching with growing unease. Reaching his mother, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded, lying only a little. "I didn't want to cause a scene, baby." "I know you're not okay," Derek said, "but I will be." Turning to the staff member, his voice remained calm. "This is my mother, and you just disrespected the most important person in this entire building." The woman opened her mouth, but no words came. Her face turned pale, the power dynamic shifting instantly. Derek didn't wait. He walked his mother back to the SUV himself, opened the door, and helped her in. Just as he was about to close it, she grabbed his hand gently. "Don't let them ruin your moment," she said softly. He leaned closer and whispered, "You are my moment." Then he closed the door, turned, and climbed the steps again. This time, he wasn't just walking. He was carrying fire under his calm expression. What happened next shook boardrooms and headlines from New York to San Francisco. Inside the country club's private dining room, nothing had changed outwardly. Derek's chair sat untouched. The pen beside the thick binder of contracts still waited for his signature. More than a year of meetings, negotiations, and strategic planning, all ready to be finalized. The champagne towers sparkled in the afternoon light. The air was thick with anticipation and tension. Derek returned, silent, calm, but the shift in the atmosphere was immediate. No yelling, no grand pronouncement, just a heavy, quiet stillness that settled like a storm cloud before a summer downpour. Preston Ward, Hathaway Group's lead counsel, cleared his throat. "Is there something wrong?" he asked, the tone of a man trying to sound calm as millions began to slip through his fingers. Derek's gaze swept the room. From board members to attorneys, from the smirking young men to the quiet assistants, his eyes finally landed on Victoria Hathaway. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. Instead, he said with steady conviction, "Today was supposed to be a merger, a future built on trust. But if this is how you treat people you think don't matter, if this is how you treat my mother, then your name doesn't belong next to mine." He pushed the binder across the table, stood up, and walked out, leaving behind nearly $1 billion and a room full of stunned faces. Outside, the sunlight hadn't changed, but inside that club, everything else had. Victoria Hathaway was still sipping her wine when Derek approached. She didn't even flinch, half turned on her chair, legs crossed, as if nothing had happened. There was no trace of discomfort on her face. In fact, she looked as composed as ever, as though the money behind her last name had steamrolled every objection. She radiated the unshakable certainty of someone who believed everything was already signed, sealed, and done. But Derek didn't sit down. He walked behind the chair where he was supposed to sign the deal, placed both hands firmly on its back, and stood tall. "I wanted to say a few things," he began. A few heads turned. The room wasn't loud, but it was no longer breathing. "You all know what this deal means," he continued, voice calm but unyielding. "Not just for our companies, but for the next generation of infrastructure across this country. We're talking about reshaping how goods move, how people live." He paused, making eye contact with each face at the table. "But I'm not signing it." The silence cracked, then quickly filled with whispers and disbelief. A few glanced toward Victoria, who turned her head, not quickly, but with just enough sharpness to betray the sting in his words. "Excuse me?" she said with a laugh that didn't belong in the room anymore. Derek nodded slowly. "You heard me." Preston Ward, the Hathaway Group's general counsel, tried to regain control. "If there's a concern, Derek, we're happy to go back to the negotiating table." But Derek ignored the olive branch. He finally sat, not in the chair prepared for him, but in one at the farthest corner of the room, away from the contracts, the pens, and the expectations. Victoria leaned forward, her smile brittle. "Let's not overreact to a misunderstanding. I didn't recognize the woman, that's all." Derek blinked once, slowly. "That woman is my mother." Victoria hesitated, trying to contain the situation. "Certainly not." "You knew," he interrupted, his voice low. "You just didn't care." Preston cleared his throat, trying again. "Millions of dollars have been invested in preparation. There are legal implications on both sides." Derek leaned back in his chair and replied without blinking. "Then I'll see you in court." He stood again. "Explain to a judge how publicly humiliating my mother was part of your strategy." Victoria muttered, "You're getting emotional." He leaned forward, arms crossed. "You think I built this company from a corner office? I loaded boxes into trucks. I drove overnight routes at 3 in the morning. I ran payroll from a folding table because we couldn't afford an accountant. I watched my mom ride 2 buses to clean houses so I could keep the lights on in our apartment. Sue, when she showed up here wearing her best, proud as hell, and you treated her like she didn't belong? You disrespected both of us." The room had no words. Then Derek looked at the contracts one last time, turned away, and walked out. No handshake, no folder, no goodbye. And by the next morning, silence was no longer an option for anyone involved. The first report surfaced from a small business podcast in Philadelphia. A guest who had attended the luncheon let something slip. Black CEO walks away from $900 million 0-cents merger after billionaire insults his mother. That headline alone ignited a national firestorm. By lunchtime, TechPulse, Forbes, and Business Today had published their takes. By 5, cable news hosts were debating it on air. But it wasn't the money that kept the story alive. It was the footage. Someone had captured Derek Samuels the next morning walking into his headquarters in downtown Manhattan. No entourage, no designer sunglasses. Just a man holding a cup of coffee and nodding to the receptionist, exactly like he did every other morning. A reporter called out, "Is it true you walked away because of Hathaway?" Another shouted, "Do you regret turning down $900 million 0 cents?" He didn't stop. He didn't need to. Inside, his team's inbox was overflowing. Some investors were furious, others confused. But the most unexpected flood came from strangers. Warehouse workers, retired veterans, teachers, and first-generation entrepreneurs, all writing the same thing. "Thank you for not letting it slide." That afternoon, Derek called a press conference. No PR backdrop, no curated brand moment. Folding table, a podium, and 20 reporters crammed into a room built for 10. He stepped up to the mic, shoulders tired, voice steady. "I didn't walk away because of the money," he said. "I walked away because the moment you allow disrespect into the room, it spreads, it multiplies, it becomes part of the culture. I wasn't raised that way. And I won't build the future on silence." A CNBC reporter asked, "Did Victoria Hathaway personally make the comment?" He didn't blink. "It was loud enough for those nearby to hear, and loud enough for my mother to feel." Another reporter asked, "Some say that's not enough reason to kill a billion-dollar deal." Derek nodded slowly. And then he said, "If that's true, maybe it's time we revalue what's really worth $1 billion. The room was silent. Derek didn't speak for long. He didn't need to. "Respect is non-negotiable," he said, standing tall, "and the moment we start trading that for contracts, we've already lost." Then he turned and walked out. Just like the day before. But this time, the world outside that meeting room had changed. In places where people once whispered, they now spoke with courage. By nightfall, clips of Derek's speech spread across TikTok, YouTube, and X. A former Hathaway employee shared her own story, how she'd once been told to use the service elevator during a gala. A Latina waitress recounted being asked to remove her apron before entering a lobby to deliver food. In hours, the posts had thousands of shares, hashtags emerged, stories surfaced, and though Derek had never set out to start a movement, sometimes all it takes is one person standing firm to help others find their footing. Behind the scenes, the Hathaway Group scrambled. The board called an emergency meeting. For the first time, Victoria Hathaway's eldest son, Clinton, who had been largely absent during negotiations, asked a one question no one wanted to face. "Do we need to apologize?" Victoria frowned. "Apologize to someone who overreacted?" "You offended that man's mother, Vic," Clinton said bluntly. "At a public event, at the signing of $1 billion deal. What did you think would happen?" "We've said worse to each other in this very room," Victoria shot back. "And none of us have ever lost a multi-billion-dollar buyback over it." Clinton shook his head. "That's just it. Things have changed. The numbers are shifting. Shareholders are asking questions. Analysts are flagging brand damage. Even the PR team won't touch the story." Over the weekend, the Hathaway name began surfacing again, but not for its legacy. Now every old story, the snubs, the stares, the elitism, was under a new microscope. No longer just whispers of the traditional wealthy class, but signs of a rot no one had dared to name out loud. While the Hathaways scrambled to control the fallout, Derek faced pressure from a very different source: his own team. Inside his Manhattan headquarters, the mood wasn't exactly celebratory. To the public, Derek had become a symbol, a hero, the man who gave up generational wealth to defend his mother's dignity. But symbols come with scrutiny, and scrutiny brings pressure. Inside the boardroom, 12 floors above Market Street, Derek met with his executive team. Many of them had been with him since the early days, back when they were lifting crates in warehouses. But even loyalty has layers, and not all of them agreed with his decision. Elliot Trammell, the CFO, was the first to speak. "We need to talk long-term, not this week, 6 months from now. That merger would have connected us to international infrastructure." "I know," Derek said calmly. "We're expecting legal retaliation. Hathaway's already drafted a breach claim." "They say you walked away over personal reasons," Elliot added. "It wasn't personal," Derek replied. "It was principle." Julian Ricks, the COO, jumped in. "But can we afford principle right now? We're not Google, we're not even Series C." Derek looked at him, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Let the board panic if they want, I won't." Across the table, Neo Whitlow, the head of marketing, leaned forward. "Merrick, I support what you did, I really do, but you need to understand something. You've become a headline. People aren't just talking about what you did, they're turning it into a symbol." She continued, "You're now the man who gave up $1 billion to defend his mother's dignity. That kind of story comes with expectations." "I didn't say no to money," Derek said. "I said no to being owned." "I get that," Neo replied. "But if you don't control the narrative, others will, and they already are." Elliot added, "I've gotten calls this morning. Investors want a plan. They want guarantees." Derek stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Cars moved, people hurried along the sidewalks. A mother held her child's hand as they crossed the street. He thought of his own mother, of how small she looked on those cold marble steps, and how tall she stood in his heart. "I'm not going to teach the next generation that power means swallowing disrespect," Derek finally said. "Not here, not in my company, and definitely not for profit." Julian leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "But what if we collapse because of this?" Derek turned. "Then we rebuild," he said. "But we won't rot from the inside." A long silence followed. Then, something shifted. Nia nodded. Elliot, after a pause, followed. And even Julian, still unsure, gave a slow, reluctant shrug. "We'll hold," Elliot said. They weren't all in full agreement, but something unspoken had changed. Maybe it was respect, maybe fear, maybe both. But not everyone outside that room was on his side. Especially those who had placed bets on the bonuses, the stock, the merger gold rush that had just gone up in smoke. 2 days later, Derek's phone buzzed. A message appeared. It was from his cousin and his co-founder, Theron Ingram. They met at the same diner in West Orange, New Jersey. The one where, over a decade ago, 2 cousins had once scribbled their first business plan on a napkin. Theron Ingram was already seated when Derek slid into the booth across from him. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of Theron, steam slowly curling into the air. "I heard from Monroe Bank this morning," Theron said without greeting. "They're putting a pause on our credit line." Derek didn't react, just gave a small nod. "That's the same line we were going to use to expand operations on the West Coast," Theron continued. "I figured they might," Derek replied quietly. Theron looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Derek, we were right there. This wasn't just some flashy acquisition. This was our shot forward, for us, for our kids." Derek's voice didn't waver. "And I won't let that future be built on the humiliation of my mother." Theron leaned back, exhaling sharply. He hadn't expected that answer. Maybe, deep down, he believed it wasn't Derek's battle to fight, that Gloria hadn't even pushed back, she just stood there being trampled on. "This isn't like back in Trenton," Theron muttered. "You made this call, for all of us, without a conversation." "I did it," Derek said firmly, "because I was raised not to sell my name for a seat at someone else's table." Theron pursed his lips, frustration mounting. You're lucky people are still calling you a hero. Let's hope that lasts. Derek stood and placed a $20 bill on the table. Or I'll sleep just fine knowing I stood for something. But even as he walked out, he knew the real storm hadn't hit yet. He was coming at the Hathaway estate in Greenwich, an ivy-clad fortress of stone walls, wrought iron gates, and surgically trimmed hedges. Tension hung like smoke in the air. Inside the main house, the family convened in a somber conference room, a long mahogany table stretched under a chandelier. No one touched their wine. Victoria Hathaway sat at the head, her fingers laced under her chin. Clinton, her eldest son, leaned back with a tight jaw. Bradley paced near the windows, scrolling anxiously through his phone. The only one who dared speak was Eleanor Wynne, their longtime PR strategist. "We need to release a statement," she said carefully. "A brief acknowledgement, express regret, emphasize shared values." Victoria scoffed. "Shared values? That woman didn't belong there. And that's not my fault." Eleanor stared at her. "You said that, out loud, in front of your children. I've spent years protecting your legacy." Clinton stopped pacing. "Derek's mother walked out," he said grimly, "and so did a lot of potential investors. Our tech portfolio is losing attention." "We can come back," Victoria waved off. "They always do. Pride fades when the money runs out." Eleanor slammed her folder shut. "You don't get it. This isn't a negotiation anymore. It's cultural. You triggered something bigger." Bradley glanced up from his phone. "Everyone's calling him a hero now. His speech is being reposted. By everyone. Even Mom." "Our Mom retweeted it." Victoria rolled her eyes. "They'll forget by next week." Clinton looked at her with something between pity and disbelief. "No. You became a symbol of elitism, of racism. You're the face of every podcast, every headline, every angry TikTok duet. And you haven't even said sorry." "I don't apologize for having standards," she said coldly. "Then we're done," Clayton snapped. "You've already lost the deal. I won't let you lose the family legacy." She turned slowly, narrowing her eyes. "So you're on their side now?" "I'm on the side of reality," he said. And for the first time in decades, the imperial calm of the Hathaway dynasty cracked. No amount of polished press releases could erase what had happened on that marble step. Not her tone, not Gloria's face. Eventually, a statement was released. It was bland, sterile, wrapped in legal language. "The Hathaway Group regrets the unfortunate misunderstanding that led to the early termination of merger discussions. We remain committed to values of inclusion and mutual respect." Derek never responded publicly. He didn't have to. Instead, he kept building. And that's when journalists started digging deeper. Photos surfaced of a teenage Derek making deliveries in New York. A quote from an old teacher went viral, recalling how he'd stay after school just to read business books. Even an old podcast clip reemerged, one where Derek said simply, "I'm not trying to join anybody's club. I'm trying to build my own house." In the weeks that followed, Gloria Samuels became more than a mother. She became a symbol. She made a brief appearance on Morning Update, sitting in a plain chair, hands resting gently in her lap. "I don't ask for attention," she said, voice soft but certain. "But I raised a son who knows when silence costs too much." When the host asked if she wished he had signed the deal anyway, Gloria gave a quiet, unwavering smile. "Some things come with a necklace too heavy for me to wear." The segment went viral. Influencers stitched it onto TikTok. Young entrepreneurs quoted it in workshops. Quietly, but unmistakably, companies began pulling back from Hathaway partnerships, not because of Derek, but because of what Victoria Hathaway had come to represent. In an era where perception travels faster than truth, it becomes the truth, and this truth was still unfolding. Derek didn't gloat. He went back to work. He met with partners, hired new team members, visited his mother every Sunday, always with gardenias and banana pudding from her favorite bakery in Trenton. But just when it seemed like the dust had settled, a phone call yanked him back into the storm, not for what he had walked away from, but because of what someone else had just unearthed. The call came just after 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. Derek was alone in his office, the city dimming outside, the sanitation team quietly mopping downstairs. The number was blocked. Something told him to pick up. "Mr. Samuels?" A raspy voice croaked. "I'm not calling to cause trouble. I'm calling because you need to know what's coming." The man on the line claimed to have worked with the Hathaways for 15 years, on their acquisition legal team. "I wasn't the first name they tried to erase when I didn't play nice," the voice continued. "And now they're preparing a counter-lawsuit." Derek straightened. "They're digging into your filings, your early funding rounds, trying to paint you as unstable, unpredictable, claiming you mixed politics with business and ruined shareholder value. They're betting people forget why you walked away." Derek stared out the window. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen it before. They destroy in silence and then deny they ever did. You embarrassed them in public. They won't forgive that. They'll try to bury you, quietly." The line went dead. Derek sat still. He had known they'd fight dirty, but this was war, and they wouldn't just stop at his name. They'd come for his reputation, his company, even his mother. He called Nia Whitlow immediately. The next morning she found him in the office before sunrise. "She's not going to lose quietly," Nia said after hearing the call. "Victoria will turn your story into her weapon." "Let her try," Derek replied. But Nia thought 5 steps ahead. "No, we tell your story first. We show them who you are, before she tries to tell them who you're not." Within 48 hours a new campaign launched, not with flashy slogans, not with emotional music or dramatized edits. Just truth. Warehouse workers recorded short clips thanking Derek for better working conditions. Investors spoke about his honesty during hard quarters. Former interns, now professionals, posted stories about how Derek had mentored them, quietly, without cameras, without hashtags. But the most powerful video came from Gloria. Sitting in her small Trenton living room, she looked directly into the camera. "I didn't raise my son to be an entrepreneur," she said. "I raised him to be a man who stands firm even when standing means losing something." He hit like a lightning bolt. Cable news couldn't ignore it. Hashtags surged again, comment sections turned. And suddenly the Hathaway Group's whisper campaign looked exactly like what it was: bitter. Still, they didn't stop. A week later, the Hathaway Group released internal documents claiming Derek had previously breached a 20-year agreement with Stratusline Logistics. They implied he had a pattern, walking away when it suited him. But that same day, Stratus CEO Leonard Greer went public. "Derek Samuels walked away because he refused to approve a pay cut for our drivers, and I wish I had done the same." The Hathaway narrative began to fracture, and every desperate attempt to regain control only deepened the wound they still refused to name or heal. Inside the once mighty Hathaway estate, Victoria Hathaway began to feel the walls closing in. The contracts gone, the invitations canceled. A museum board revoked her honorary chair. Longtime donors began distancing themselves. But Victoria didn't look inward. "This is a trend," she hissed over breakfast. "It'll fade." Clinton didn't respond. His silence said what needed to be said. It wasn't fading. Not this time. He was building towards something. Gloria never announced, but you could feel it. She sat at the head of the Hathaway table one last time, sipping her coffee slowly, as if the tension around her barely registered. Her gaze drifted past everyone, unimpressed, unbothered. But Clinton Hathaway saw the truth. The family didn't need Victoria anymore. "I won't," he said flatly, standing. "The family business doesn't need you now." Victoria didn't answer. But for the first time, her hands trembled slightly. While the Hathaway empire fractured behind closed gates, Derek was facing a reckoning of a different kind, one that had nothing to do with contracts, lawsuits, or headlines. It had everything to do with legacy. He stood in the backyard of his mother's modest home in Trenton, watching her gently trim basil from the wooden planter box they'd built together 2 summers ago. The sun hung low over the fence, bathing the lawn in soft orange light. Gloria wore one of her old church dresses, the seams a little faded but still pressed and clean. She moved slowly, her posture calm, as if the weight of the past few weeks hadn't touched her at all. But Derek knew better. She didn't like being stared at, and she especially didn't like being treated like she was a symbol. "Does all this attention bother you?" he asked gently. Gloria didn't look up. "Attention zones bother me," she said, placing another basil leaf in the bowl on her hip. "But I know what comes with it." "What do you mean?" "They don't like it," she replied softly. "When we walk out of the room with our heads held high. Makes them feel small, so they try to make you feel smaller." Derek sat down on the porch steps beside her. "They're still saying I walked away from that deal for nothing." She looked at him then. Steady. Honest. "You know what they're really saying? That they've never paid the price of respect." He nodded slowly. "I know Theron's still upset," he admitted. "He thinks I took something from the family." Gloria walked over and eased herself down next to him. "Baby, every family has its own storm. But if you bend in the middle of it, what are you handing down to the next generation?" "I just wanted to protect you," he said, voice soft. "You did," she said. "But this ain't just about me anymore. It's about what you stand for. Don't run from that now." Later that night, Derek sat alone in his Jersey City apartment. A replay of his press conference flickered on TV. He never liked hearing his own voice. Too careful, too polished. That's not how he grew up speaking. But the world was listening now, hanging on every word. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Leonard Greer, CEO of Stratus. "DC Council wants to talk to you. They're forming a leadership board on ethical business practices. They want you to lead it." Derek stared at the screen. He had never asked for any of this. He just wanted to build something real, something that lasted, something honest. But now, his story had grown louder than him, and with that came a pressure he never planned for. The next morning, he met again with Nia and Julian. The energy was different now. Quieter, worn down, but grounded. Julian spoke first. "We're stable," he said. "That's the good news." Nia followed. "And the noise?" "It's helping, actually. 3 logistics companies reached out yesterday, quietly, but still." "Well?" Derek asked. "Because of what you protect," Nia replied. "Not just who, but what." Derek fell silent for a moment. "And now?" "They want me to speak up more," he said. "Join panels, councils, become the face of something new." Julian nodded. "You've already built a company, now build a voice." "But," Derek hesitated. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he said. "Symbols get worshipped or torn apart, and neither feels like the life I want." Nia looked at him, her voice steady. "Then build something stronger than a symbol, build something that outlasts one." Derek turned to the wall and picked up a dry erase marker. He began sketching a simple timeline. No slogans, no speeches. Just the next phase of growth. Distribution hubs, outreach zones, community impact logistics, partnerships with schools. A business that spoke through its integrity, not its volume. "Let's scale without saying it," he said. "Let's prove we never needed that deal in the first place." Nia smiled quietly. Now, this was Derek. Julian chuckled as Derek finished outlining his plan. "Took you long enough to come back around," he teased. But Derek wasn't done. He pointed to the calendar. "Next week, I want to host something here," he said. "Not a press conference, a real event, for our people. Warehouse staff, interns, office crew, food, music. Something that reminds everyone who we really are." "Like a family reunion?" Nia asked. "Exactly, where everyone gets a plate, no matter where they're from." They were starting to laugh again. But before they could even send the invites, something unexpected arrived. A letter. It came in a thin white envelope, no return address, just Derek's name neatly typed. At first, he didn't even notice it. It sat with a stack of invoices and vendor bids. He didn't open it until hours after the office was dark and quiet. Just him, the soft hum of the night cleaning crew, and the glow of his desk lamp. The handwriting inside was precise, elegant, the kind that takes its time. Mr. Samuels, you don't know me, but I know who you are. My father was the groundskeeper at Hathaway Ridge from 1985 until his death in 2009. He raised me and my two sisters while waking up before sunrise and never once complaining. He taught us to take pride in our work, even when no one saw us. I saw your story, I cried. Not because I was surprised by what happened to your mother, I wasn't. I cried because someone finally said no, and meant it. You reminded me of my father. He didn't have your background, but he had your backbone. Thank you for not forgetting where you came from. With deep respect, Emil Pierce. Derek read it twice. Then again. There was no email, no LinkedIn profile, just the name, Camille Pierce. That night, over dinner, he told Gloria. She said her father was the groundskeeper, he said, pushing his greens around the plate. Gloria nodded slowly. I remember him. Always kept that estate cleaner than its owners. She said you reminded her of him? Derek nodded again. Gloria smiled faintly. Funny how the truth finds you. Doesn't matter how, it just does. Derek said nothing more, but the letter sat heavy in his chest, not with regret, but with a deeper weight. The weight of knowing that one quiet choice had reached someone who had lived in the shadow of that gate for decades. The next morning, he asked Nia to find Camille. 2 days later, she called. She teaches 4th grade in Harrisburg, doesn't use social media, lives in a small apartment with a rescue dog. Should I call first? Derek asked. She doesn't expect a reply. I'll knock. 2 days later, Derek stood on a small stoop in Harrisburg, holding a paper bag from the local bakery. He felt something he rarely did anymore. Nervous. Camille opened the door after his second knock. Mid-40s, brown ponytail, jeans, and a school sweatshirt. When she saw him, she stiffened. I'm Derek, he said simply, and this is banana bread. Figured you might be tired of people showing up wanting something. She blinked, then chuckled. Step inside before my dog tries to eat you. Inside her cozy apartment, a framed photo rested above the fireplace. An older black man in worn work boots stood under a tall oak tree, a quiet pride in his eyes. M treated the estate like it was his grandfather's, Camille said, handing Derek a mug of tea. She told stories, how her father refused to call the Hathaways Mr. or Mrs., how he saved every paycheck, how he made Camille read contracts out loud even when she was just 10 years old. I'd like you, she said at one point, not because you're successful, but because you knew when to walk away. They talked for 2 hours, no recording, no hashtags, just two people connected by a history no one asked for, but both carried. When Derek stood to leave, Camille handed him an old photograph, her father under that same oak tree, rake in hand. You'll need this more than I will, she said. Back in his car, Derek tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket. Because sometimes the strongest reminders don't come from headlines. They come from ink, from oak trees, from the quiet pride of people who lived whole lives behind the scene. But just as the world softened again, just as peace felt near, Derek's greatest test arrived. It began not with a scandal or lawsuit, but with a voicemail. A nurse's voice, gentle. Hi, Mr. Samuels, no emergency. But when you have a moment, please give us a call. Derek paused. He knew that tone. And suddenly, all the public battles, the investors, the speeches, the press, fell quiet. Now, the next battle would be personal. And this time, it wasn't about a billion-dollar deal. It was about everything he might lose. Gloria had briefly fainted during her weekly Bible study. The kind of moment people brush off until they don't. She was taken to Capital Care Medical Center in Trenton just to be safe. But as soon as Derek got the call, he left the meeting without explanation, keys in hand, jaw tight, driving down the highway like the rest of the world could wait. By the time he arrived, Gloria was perched on a hospital bed, sipping ginger beer like it was a minor inconvenience. "I told them I just stood up too fast," she said as he entered. "Didn't need all this fuss." But Derek could see it. The tremble in her hand as she set the cup down, the fatigue behind her eyes. He said nothing, just sat and gently took her wrist in his hand. "What did the doctor say?" "Said, I need to slow down. Take my iron pills, eat more greens." "I told you that," Derek said with a smile. But the knot in his chest didn't ease. A few minutes later, Dr. May Lin stepped into the room. Young, poised, and warm-eyed, she offered Gloria a kind smile before speaking softly to Derek. "Your mother's vitals stabilized quickly, but we're running more tests. Her blood pressure's inconsistent. It's been a while since her last full cardiac screening." Gloria waved her hand. "I feel fine." Derek nodded. "Run the tests anyway." Over the next 2 days, the results trickled in. Nothing catastrophic, but also nothing to ignore. A slight heart valve leak, mild arrhythmias, low iron levels. It wasn't a time bomb, but it was a message. Life doesn't wait forever. That night, as they sat in her room watching Sanford and Son, Gloria said, eyes fixed on the TV, "You're doing so well, baby." He grinned. "You just called me baby in front of the nurse. You brought me into this world. I'm allowed." He chuckled, but it didn't reach all the way. "I didn't laugh all the way," he said. "I'm not done." "I know," she replied. Then she added, almost as a whisper, "But don't wait too long to live." That hit differently. He looked at her, really looked, at the deep lines carved by time, sacrifice, faith. A woman who never asked for a stage, but somehow became the heart of a national story. "I've been thinking," Derek said, "about what you told me, about not passing silence down." She turned to him. "I want to start something," he continued. "A real platform for our drivers, warehouse staff, families, health screenings, childcare, tuition aid, not just UPS slogans, real things." Gloria's face curved into a proud, tear-brushed smile. "That sounds like you." "I want to name it after you," Derek said. She coughed, blinking. "You don't have to do that." "I do," he said softly, "because you built me." A few weeks later, the Gloria Initiative was launched. No red carpets, no press tour to expose them. Just a website, a soft launch video, 3 non-profit partnerships. 3 non-profit partnerships. They're the messenger, not me. Just do it. Better yourself than me, I promise you. Just do it. Better yourself. It exploded. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets. The conversation shifted. From confrontation to construction. From blaming broken rules to building better ones. At the first community day, Derek stood under a white tent beside a long folding table. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Kids ran past face paint booths and book giveaways. Warehouse workers, once worried about layoffs, laughed with their families over barbecue plates. Derek picked up the mic. "I turned down $900 million, he said, and people said I was crazy." He paused, smiling as the breeze lifted the edge of the tent. "But this, right here, this is worth more than any check." The crowd didn't cheer loudly, but they didn't need to. It was something warmer, something real. As the sun dipped and the lot emptied, Derek looked up at the sky. He thought of Camille's father, of Theron, of that cold boardroom in Greenwich, of his mother's quiet dignity as he walked her out of that country club. The storm had brought him here. And just as the wind seemed to settle, another message arrived. Not in ink, not in headlines, but in a voice he hadn't heard in 20 years. It came through voicemail. No warning, just a blinking notification after a long day of interviews and calls. He pressed play. "Derek, it's Dwayne. I don't know if you still have this number. I've been watching the news. Heard what you did. For your mother. For the deal. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry For everything. If you want to talk, here's my number. That was it. No second message. No follow-up. Just Dwayne, his father's brother, the man who vanished after the funeral, who made promises beside the casket and disappeared before dawn. No goodbyes, no explanations. Derek stood frozen, key still in hand, screen glowing in the dark. He hadn't thought of Dwayne in years. He remembered his 13th birthday, hoping for a card, a call. Remembered sitting at the kitchen table, pouring himself a glass of water every time the phone rang. Now, after all this time, that voice had aged, slower, deeper, but still him. The next morning, Gloria called. "I heard from Dwayne," she said, as if it were nothing. "Left me a message just like you." Derek didn't know what to say. "I don't know what he wants," he said finally. "Maybe nothing," she replied. "Maybe he's just trying to make peace. While he still has time. I'm not sure I need peace with him." Gloria paused. "Sometimes peace isn't for them, sweetheart," she said gently. "Sometimes it's for you." Later that day, Derek replayed the voicemail. And this time, he didn't feel angry. He just listened. And for once, he didn't feel alone in the silence. He felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that came from carrying something unspoken for too long, like a muscle clenched for years, finally loosening. That evening, as the city dimmed and the world slowed, Derek picked up the phone. 3 rings. A click. Then his voice. Low, cautious, hopeful. "Hello." A pause. Then a small, cracked laugh. "You sound just like your father." Derek had heard that before, but tonight it landed differently. Silence lingered before Dwayne spoke again. "I didn't call to explain it all. The silence. I was a coward when your father died. I couldn't look at anything that reminded me of him, and you were him all over again. A mirror." Derek said nothing. "I left," Dwayne continued, "because staying felt harder, because I thought I'd disappoint you too." Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't need you to be perfect, I just needed you to stay." There was a soft, broken sound on the other end. I know I let you down." They talked for 15 minutes. Not about abandonment, not about guilt. They talked about fishing trips, about Derek's high school football games, about how Dwayne had quietly carved out a career far away, always watching, but never ready to return. When they hung up, Derek didn't feel closure, but he felt lighter, and sometimes that's enough. That weekend, at a team retreat, Derek stood before his staff and shared the moment, not for attention, but for clarity. "Forgiveness isn't approval," he said. "It's just refusing to let bitterness take up all your space." Some nodded, some smiled, and a few understood more deeply than they could say. Later that evening, as he stepped out under the fading sky, a young intern jogged to catch up. "Mr. Samuels," she called, breathless, "I just wanted to thank you. My dad always told me no one in business keeps their ethics, that business is only about money, but you proved him wrong." Derek smiled gently. "No, my mom did." And when he got back to the car, his shoulders relaxed. His head was high, his heart clear, and that was when he finally understood. Legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you survive. It's what you walk through without letting it kill your softness. It's the decision, over and over again, to refuse to let pain make you bitter, or silence make you disappear. Derek lingered in the quiet of his car long after the intern walked away. The street outside hummed with the soft rhythm of evening traffic, but inside the vehicle everything stood still. His hands rested on the wheel, but he wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Her words echoed in his mind. You proved him wrong. And something inside him stirred, not with pride, but with a solemn understanding of how heavy rightness can feel when it's hard-earned. He had not set out to change anyone's mind. Not the investors, not the press, not the disillusioned fathers of interns who told their daughters that ethics had no place in business. What he had done what he had always done, was choose to be rooted in something deeper. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to sit still long enough to feel the cost of that choice. Not in dollars, but in weight, in all the pieces of himself he had held tightly together to stand tall when it would have been so easy to stay seated. He had answered Dwayne's call. He had forgiven what many would never have touched. He had seen in his mother's eyes not just weariness but wisdom, the kind that only decades of being ignored, underestimated, and quietly dismissed could give a person. And in all of that, Derek had come to understand a truth that had no corporate language or PR spin. Real power doesn't come from owning the room. It comes from walking out of it and still being whole. Back home, in the quiet of his apartment, he found himself reaching for the photo Camille had given him. Her father stood beneath a tree, rake in hand, expression still and strong, like a man who had spent his life sweeping away the debris of other people's comfort. It reminded Derek of his father, too, of grease under his nails, of tools on a Sunday morning, of promises left half-spoken, and memories that grew fainter every year. He didn't cry, but his throat tightened in a way that felt like grief and grace. And that night, as he drifted to sleep, he knew something was shifting, not just outside, in headlines, initiatives, hashtags, but inside, the kind of shift that doesn't come from winning or losing, but from standing exactly where you need to be, even when it costs you everything. The following weeks passed like chapters in a quieter novel. Derek returned to the work. He visited local warehouses, shook hands, listened to stories. He ate meals with his team in the break room, not the boardroom. The Gloria initiative grew beyond what he imagined, not just in scale, but in spirit. Workers spoke of it not as a program, but as a promise, that someone, somewhere, saw them, that their children might not have to fight for visibility the way they had. At home, Gloria was healing. She rested more, argued less. But even on days when her body moved slowly, her voice remained strong. She had once told Derek not to wait too long to live, and he had listened. He had walked through fire to make sure her name meant something beyond an apology that never came. And now, every email, every donation, every story shared in the name of the Gloria Initiative was another thread in a legacy she never asked to carry, but now wore with quiet pride. They spent more Sundays together, watching old shows and cooking in familiar silence. On one of those days, as Derek sliced apples for her pie crust, Gloria looked at him and said simply, "You made our name mean something." It stopped him mid-cut. He had thought about legacy as something to pass down, something to build, but he hadn't thought about it as something to restore, to redeem, and suddenly everything that had happened, Victoria's smirk, the boardroom silence, the viral clips, the handwritten letter, the interns, even Dwayne's call, folded into something much simpler than ambition. It was responsibility, not just to do well, but to do right. And in that moment he understood why it had felt so hard for so long. Because he hadn't just been building a business. He had been digging through generations of silence, of be grateful to be here and don't cause trouble, of wearing respectability like armor and calling it progress. And what he had done, what his mother had done with her hat and her posture and her refusal to shrink, was name something that had long been unnamed. They had demanded dignity. And dignity, he now knew, wasn't something you bought or borrowed. It was something you claimed and defended, even when no one clapped, even when everyone else was sitting. To be kept building, not louder, but better. At a community event in Oakland, a father came up to him with tears in his eyes and said, "My daughter thinks she can be a CEO now and not lose her soul doing it." At a health screening in Kansas City, a mother handed him a note that read, "Thank you for protecting people you'll never meet." At a youth summit in Atlanta, he stood behind a podium and was asked how he measured success now. He didn't have to think. "When I go home and my mother's proud, that's success. When the people who clean the floors feel as important as the ones who give the speeches, that's success. When I can look at myself and say you did not sell your piece for their approval, that's success." No applause came at first, but then someone stood, and another, and slowly the room filled, not with noise, but with respect. The kind you don't demand. the kind you earn. And as the years passed, Derek never became the kind of icon people etched into stone. But he became the kind of name parents whispered to their children when teaching them about character, about choosing the hard road when the easy one betrayed your soul, about doing right, not because you'll be rewarded, but because the world needs it more than it needs another billionaire. He kept the photo of Camille's father on his desk, not framed, just quietly there. And every once in a while, when the noise of meetings and contracts and requests from the media started to cloud his focus, he'd pause. People would remember the hospital room, the old oak tree, his mother's hands trembling slightly as she picked up a cup of ginger beer and told him she was fine when she wasn't. He'd remember the moment he could have stayed seated and instead chose to rise. And in that quiet pause, he'd find his answer again. That legacy wasn't about how long your name lasted. It was about how fully you lived it while you could, and how fiercely you refused to let it be defined by anyone but you.